When you mention emissions testing to most people, what comes to mind is that certification every once in a while, every year or two, to get your new registration. You go in and they put a sniffer up the tailpipe. At least they do in California. We're looking at emissions as kind of an indicator, an engine dyno. You don't make horsepower with an engine dyno, you measure it. A cylinder head flow bench. You don't make the head flow better with it, but it gives you an idea of where you're at with your work. So with all three, the dyno, the head port bench, and the emissions analyzer, they're just tools. They're like gauges. So you take a baseline, and then you make some kind of a change, and then you go back and you recheck. And that tells you if you went in the right direction or not, and by how much. So emissions testing, believe it or not, this is all about fuel economy, but emissions testing can give you an indication of whether the car is going to get better fuel economy or not, and it doesn't take a lot of time. I mean, a fuel economy run, you're going to spend at least an hour to get a couple of miles on it, and you're going to do it, every time you want to validate and check. So you get your baseline, and then you make a change, and now is another hour. Emissions testing can give you good indications real quickly, couple of minutes. Take it, 3-4 mile run at the. I got a 1.4 mile run that I do, so it doesn't take a lot of time. We use EMS 5003 5-gas emissions analyzer with LabVIEW software. The emissions analyzer itself will measure hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and NOx. And then with the LabVIEW software, I can actually go out for a drive and plug the power adapter into the cigarette lighter, power outlet, and record emissions. And then the software can give me the averages, can give me grams per mile. So by doing a baseline that way, do a modification, it's not just idle testing. I can take it out in the real world, and using the same route every time, the conditions are pretty consistent from one test to the next. Put the sniffer in the tailpipe, and then you can run the hose like through the trunk or lift gate and mount the unit on the seat, put the laptop on the seat, and you're not watching the laptop while you're driving. You get a start point, you push start recording, and then you drive. And then you get to the other end of the route, pull over, push the stop button, and now you've got that data that you can go in, you can save it, you can export it, CSV, Excel, different formats. Now, let's take a look at the gases themselves so that we can understand how emissions testing can give us a clue as to what's going on. One of the first gases is hydrocarbons, HC, and that's unburned fuel, period. Your lowest HC is going to be ideal, 0. It's measured in parts per million. If you have high HC, it could be because of an excessively lean mixture or excessively rich mixture. It could also be because of like a bad ignition system where you have misfires. In that case, you're also going to see high oxygen levels, and it'll look like a lean mixture. But it could be bad spark plug wire or something like that. Carbon monoxide is partially burned fuel. The carbon is able to attach to one oxygen and becomes carbon monoxide, but it's not able to attach a second oxygen to stabilize into carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is high in rich conditions, period. When you're where you're supposed to be or lean of that, carbon monoxide is going to be low. Then we have carbon dioxide. Now, that is a healthy reading. That's like the one number we want to see high, because HC plus O2 in combustion gives water vapor and carbon dioxide. If you have an issue, it always goes down. So you're never going to see like an elevated CO2 level. It always goes down. And by seeing a low CO2 level, all it says is something's not right. You have to look at the other gases to kind of get an indicator of what isn't right. And then oxygen. The air has 20.9%, at least around here. and it's the oxidizer in combustion. So as you burn the fuel, you're going to consume that oxygen, and it's going to convert into H2O and CO2. It's going to become part of a carbon or hydrogen type of a molecule, and it won't come out the tailpipe as oxygen. It went in as oxygen, comes out as something else. So if you have high oxygen levels, possibly an exhaust leak. Maybe your combustion's fine, but you have high O2 levels and everything else looks good, you might have an exhaust leak. But anytime you have less than ideal combustion, you're probably going to have higher oxygen levels. Now, the exception is really rich mixtures. Of course, all the oxygen's gone, and then you still have a bunch of fuel left over, so you have high CO, high hydrocarbons, but your oxygen is pretty much at zero. Next, we have NOx. Now, NOx is a generic term where X is a variable, and it could be NO or NO2. Neither one are stable components. They're radicals, and they need to attach to something in order to stabilize and break down. This results from burning the air. N from nitrogen in the air, O from oxygen in the air. So you're like oxidizing the nitrogen in the air. It requires high temperature and time. The higher the temperature, the less time required. The longer the time, the more NOx you would make, even at not so high temperatures. So to get NOx levels low coming out of the engine, if you can either reduce peak temperatures or reduce the time frame where you have high temperatures, both will reduce NOx emissions. And about the only time you see elevated NOx is if you have too high of ignition timing advance. So we'll get back into that in just a minute here. This is a graph. It kind of shows you where that red band vertical in the center is your stoichiometric range. That's your 14.7 to 1 for gasoline. You can see when it's rich, that's to the left, lean is to the right. So like the green, CO. When you're rich, it goes high. When you're lean, it stays low. Oxygen, when you're rich, it's low. As you go lean, it goes high. Carbon dioxide has a peak where you're at stoichiometric. Hydrocarbons kind of have a peak low. It's a much wider band than just stoichiometric, but it's, when you're close to stoichiometric. And then NOx has a peak just a little on the lean side of stoichiometric. So let's take a different approach. Let's say that you have a rich mixture. What are you going to see? Well, you're going to see high hydrocarbons. You're going to see high carbon monoxide, reduced carbon dioxide, almost no oxygen, and your NOx levels will be low because all that extra fuel helps put out the fire, which keeps those temperatures in the combustion process low, reducing NOx. Going the other direction, now we have a lean mixture. Again, chances are you'll see high hydrocarbons, but it kind of depends. If you're rich or lean, but not really super, Carbon monoxide is definitely going to be low. Carbon dioxide will be at a reduced level, but oxygen is going to be high. And of course, NOx is low because you're lean and you're not making full combustion temperatures. Now, if you have an engine misfire, what does that look like that's different than either of the first two? Your hydrocarbons are going to be high because you have a misfire. You're not burning the fuel. It comes out the exhaust as HC, hydrocarbons. Your carbon monoxide is most likely going to be low because you're not burning the fuel even partially. It's a misfire. And CO is partially burned fuel. The CO2 is going to be lower because you're not converting the oxygen and the carbon in the fuel to CO2, therefore it's reduced. Oxygen is going to be high because oxygen in, oxygen out. You didn't burn it. You didn't use it to oxidize anything. And of course, NOx will be low because there's no fire. Another condition, if you have too much ignition timing advance, you can't really tell on HCCO, CO2, O2, but you're going to see elevated NOx levels. So that's like the one instance where NOx goes up. And if the timing's too far retarded, then you're going to see higher hydrocarbons, higher carbon monoxide, more than likely higher oxygen levels, but not necessarily. Your CO2 is going to be reduced, and your NOx will be low. And that's one of the tricks they used to reduce NOx in the 70s, retard ignition timing. So by using the emissions analyzer, you can troubleshoot, you can spot problems, but then if you put a magnetic heat exchanger on, or convert from 1-hole to 12-hole injectors, or do something that should improve combustion efficiency, the emissions should show it. And a lot of times you do a change, you add something, and to really get the most out of it, you have to do some kind of tuning, but that is a different topic that we will cover